the administration. Chris Fonzone, I hope I pronounced the name correctly, General Counsel of the Office of Director of National Intelligence. Next, we will hear from George Barnes, Deputy Director of the National Security Agency. We will then hear from the Deputy Director of the CIA, David Cohen. Following Mr. Cohen, we will hear from Paul Abate, the Deputy Director of the FBI. And lastly, we'll hear testimony from the Assistant Attorney General for National Security at the Department of Justice, Matt Olson. After we swear in the witnesses, each witness will have 5 minutes to provide an opening statement. Then each senator 5 minutes to ask. I urge my colleagues to focus their question on today's hearing. In particular, I'd like to emphasize to everyone on both sides of the aisle that everyone on both sides of the aisle has a responsibility not to interfere in the special counsel's ongoing criminal investigation of the former president. Mr. Trump is entitled to the presumption of innocence. Attempting to litigate the indictment against him has no place in today's hearings. Now I'd ask the witnesses to stand and be sworn. Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give before the committee will be the truth and the whole truth, so help you God? The record reflect that all of the witnesses answered in the affirmative. We'll begin with opening statements from OD&I General Counsel Chris Fonzone. Mr. Fonzone, you may proceed.
Chairman Durbin, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, an important intelligence authority set to expire at the end of the year. Section 702 is an authority that enables the United States to collect critical foreign intelligence on non-U.S. persons located outside the United States with the assistance of U.S. communications service providers. It provides the United States with indispensable insight into a diverse range of issues, from the conventional and cyber threats posed by China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, to cybersecurity and terrorism threats, to the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, to numerous other high-priority national security challenges. And it provides these insights while simultaneously requiring the government to comply with robust safeguards designed to protect the privacy and civil liberties of Americans. That's why, in a nutshell, my intelligence community and DOJ colleagues and I believe the reauthorization of Section 702 is so vital. Section 702's origins lie in the rapid changes in the threat and communications landscape that occurred early in the 21st century, when Congress recognized that the then existing legal framework for collecting intelligence, often referred to as traditional FISA,
had not kept pace with technology. Specifically, when FISA was first enacted in 1978, it was primarily designed to regulate activities inside the United States. Over time, however, the advent of the internet and other technological changes meant that terrorists, hackers, spies, and other adversaries operating overseas but using U.S. communication services were increasingly subject to traditional FISA's requirements which included that the government must obtain a court order based on probable cause to collect those adversaries' communications. The operational burden of obtaining those individual court orders was unworkable, however, and also legally unnecessary, as foreign adversaries located overseas are not entitled to Fourth Amendment protections. Section 702 was Congress's elegant solution to the problem. Rather than requiring individual judicial approval to collect intelligence on these non-U.S. persons located overseas, Congress decided to create an approach that a court would approve on a programmatic basis and that all three branches of our government would help oversee. Specifically, for the government to collect intelligence using Section 702, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, an Article III court, must annually review and approve certifications submitted by the Attorney General and Director of National Intelligence that describe the categories of foreign intelligence the government plans to acquire. Alongside these certifications, the court also reviews the detailed procedures containing privacy and civil liberties safeguards the government proposes to follow in collecting and using foreign intelligence under Section 702. And the court will only approve these certifications procedures if it concludes that they are consistent with both the Fourth Amendment and FISA, including statutory protections that require the program to be properly aimed at non-U.S. persons located outside the United States. Even after the court approves the program, the government still cannot collect information on any specific target until it complies with detailed rules that require, among other things, a documented basis for concluding that the target is a non-U.S. person located overseas and that there is an appropriate foreign intelligence purpose for the collection. Furthermore, even after the government starts collecting under Section 702, all three branches of our government engage in rigorous oversight of the program. This includes oversight from internal components at each agency
DOJ's review of the documentation for every targeting decision, programmatic oversight from DOJ and ODNI, regular reporting to the FISC, and regular reporting and briefings to the Congressional Intelligence and Judiciary Committees. I think it is safe to say that my colleagues and I unanimously believe that this program enacted by Congress in 2008 and subsequently improved over time is an essential authority. In particular, while I will leave it to my colleagues to provide more detail on Section 702's intelligence value, I will just note that I think the Attorney General and DNI pretty much summed it up in a letter they sent to congressional leadership earlier this year. Section 702 has proven invaluable again and again in protecting American lives and U.S. national security, they wrote, such that there is no way to replicate Section 702's speed, reliability, specificity, and insight. Likewise, I believe the other half of Section 702's equation, its privacy and civil liberties safeguards, have also proven their efficacy. To be sure, this does not mean the intelligence community has been perfect. To the contrary, like any human endeavor, we have made mistakes, including some important ones. But Section 702 has required us to identify and confront those mistakes, disclose them to our overseers and the public, and take remedial actions that make us better. This process also identifies areas for potential statutory improvement, and we are therefore committed to working with Congress on reforms so long as they fully preserve the critical intelligence Section 702 provides. I look forward to answering your questions today and working with you to renew this essential authority. With that, I will turn it over to my colleague from the National Security Agency.
Thank you, Mr. Fonzone. We have next NSA Deputy Director Barnes. You may proceed.
Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, and distinguished committee members. I'm honored to represent the National Security Agency here today, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you about FISA Section 702. This authority is essential to NSA's foreign intelligence mission. Without it, our ability to preserve the nation's security would be significantly impaired. The United States is the leader in internet technology, and U.S. communication services are globally distributed, including by use by myriad high-priority intelligence targets. When the intelligence community compels the assistance of electronic communication service providers under 702 authority, we quickly get access to reliable, detailed information that addresses key national security information gaps affecting the safety and security of our nation. The importance of this authority to our mission cannot be overstated. Data from FISA Section 702 helps us every day to understand the strategic intentions of foreign governments and certain non-state actors who pose threats to our interests. This source of intelligence is a big part of what keeps our leaders well informed about the threats we face. 59% of the Presidential Daily Brief articles include intelligence acquired by NSA under 702 authority, and the PDB plays a key role in keeping the leadership across our government cited on key threats. Countless intelligence community successes would not have been possible without 702. We have spoken publicly many times about how 702 has supported our counterterrorism mission, from preventing an attack on New York City's subway in 2009 to supporting the operation that took down Ayman Zawahiri just last year. But 702 has likewise become indispensable across NSA's other vital mission areas. Let me offer some specifics. 702 collection identified an Iranian ransomware attack against an American nonprofit, and the data we acquired provided the U.S. government with information needed to mitigate the damage and recover the victim organization's data without resorting to ransom payments. Information acquired under 702 authority was essential to the recovery of the cryptocurrency ransom paid by Colonial Pipeline to the foreign hacker who perpetrated the attack in 2021. Section 702 was vital in warning the international community, the private sector, and the public about DPRK efforts to commit widespread fraud, including against U.S. businesses, aimed at generating revenue for their nuclear weapons program. 702 regularly provides intelligence community counterparts with critical insights into the fentanyl supply chain, from Chinese origins of key precursor chemicals to the efforts of foreign narcotic traffickers to smuggle fentanyl and other drugs toward the United States. 702 has also helped us to uncover despicable atrocities committed by Russia and Ukraine, including the heinous murder of non-combatants and the forced relocation of Ukrainian children to Russia. In every facet of our foreign intelligence mission, 702 is critical, and that's not just an exaggeration. Last year, nearly every item in the presidential's intelligence priorities list was addressed in some way, shape, or form by 702. It's not replaceable. NSA could not replicate intelligence from 702 using other authorities. It's agile, specific, and efficient. The compelled assistance of U.S. electronic communication service providers means that for certain key requirements, we can avoid sending our officers into overseas hostile areas to mount risky collection operations. It means that we can rapidly acquire information about targets in remote and denied areas of the world where the intelligence community has little or no accessibility. It means that when we see a target changing their behavior, we can adapt quickly, ensuring that we do not miss critical leads and details. And importantly, it means that we get narrowly tailored information, the data of specific foreign targets located overseas, communicating information of foreign intelligence significance and value, all in a manner defined by the law, guided by the National Intelligence Priorities Framework, and scoped by the specific certifications approved annually by the FISC. Finally, I'll talk a bit about compliance. NSA has a deep culture of compliance. I'm proud that our workforce is so dedicated to compliance with all the laws and policies that we follow, and those that govern our SIGINT mission, including 702. The DOJ's review and assessment determined that NSA 702 targeting decisions have been over 99% compliant since the last reauthorization, in large part because we have a robust compliance program, including hundreds of dedicated compliance professionals working hand in hand with analysts. Our compliance team is part of each stage of the analytic process, from the initial targeting decision to the review of the responsive content, supporting the mission and ensuring that our culture of compliance is maintained day in and day out. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss 702 and what it means to NSA, and I'd like to turn next to my colleague, David Cohen from CIA.
CIA Deputy Director, Mr. Cohen, you may proceed.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, and members of the committee for inviting me to discuss this important topic and to represent the men and women of the Central Intelligence Agency. The information the CIA derives from FISA 702 collection is quite simply indispensable for CIA to perform its mission. It allows us, with precision and with care for the rights of the American public that we serve, to gain authoritative, timely, and actionable insights into the full range of national security threats and foreign policy issues confronting our nation. I thought it would be most useful for the committee to focus my opening remarks on some of the ways that CIA uses FISA 702 collection every day to do our job. I'll focus in particular on how we use 702 in our overseas clandestine collection and counterintelligence operations, in preparing all-source analysis for policymakers here in Congress and in the administration, and as part of the government-wide response to the fentanyl crisis. First, starting with our operations. As I'm sure you know, one of CIA's core missions is to operate clandestinely overseas to collect intelligence from individuals we've recruited. These individuals, our assets, often risk their lives and the lives of their families to provide information to CIA officers to help the United States. And my officers who spot, assess, develop, recruit, and meet with these individuals often put their lives, their safety, and their well-being at risk to do their job. Because human intelligence operations carry a great deal of risk, we often think about human intelligence, or humans, as the collection of last resort, the means of collection we turn to when no other source of collection can deliver the information we need to keep this country safe. Once we've reached that point, once we know a human source is necessary, we have to find exactly the right person among hundreds, maybe thousands of potential candidates. FISA Section 702 helps us find many of these individuals, these potential sources, and it allows CIA officers to do their jobs faster and with less risk. Once we have an operation underway, 702 collection helps us keep those operations secure by allowing us to identify threats early and to provide real-time monitoring during our most dangerous operations. CIA officers face unique challenges and threats from all sorts of nefarious actors, from hostile intelligence services trying to identify our officers and our sources, to terrorist groups who seek to harm or even kill them. We take very seriously our responsibility to protect our officers and the people who put their lives on the line to work with us as sources. 702 is quite simply a key tool in our arsenal to help keep both our officers and our assets safe. Section 702 collection plays a critical role in our analytic mission, ensuring we can provide the best possible all-source analysis to policymakers in the administration and in Congress. CIA analysts leverage intelligence from every source available: open source information, human, imagery, signals intelligence, and 702 to prepare this analysis. Information collected under 702 is a key piece of that all-source puzzle, and a particularly important one because of its timeliness and precision. The statistics bear this out. As I'm sure you know, one of our primary analytic publications is the World Intelligence Review, known by its acronym, the WIRE. It is provided across the executive branch and to Congress. In the last year, nearly 40% of our daily WIRE articles contain at least one intelligence report derived from 702 collection. In our other analytic products for Congress and the administration, including the Presidential Daily Brief, the numbers are similar. Section 702 is, put simply, a critical component of much of CAA's analytic product across the gamut of national security and foreign policy issues. The third way we leverage 702 is to support broader U.S. government efforts against foreign-based drug trafficking organizations. 702 collection illuminates the networks and global supply chains used by foreign-based drug trafficking organizations. This includes how they manufacture and transport everything from precursor chemicals to their foreign labs to their distribution of their product into the United States. As we gain this insight, we're able to support and partner with foreign governments to take action. Most recently, 702 has proven critical in helping us counter the fentanyl threat, which, as I'm sure this committee is aware, is responsible for the deaths of nearly 100,000 Americans every year. Without 702, we would be missing essential information on the dangerous groups and individuals behind overseas fentanyl production and distribution, and CAA's ability, working with and through our partners, to stem the flow of fentanyl into our communities would be greatly diminished. I hope these three examples illustrate some of the ways that we at CAA rely on FISA 702 collection every day. It is, as I said at the outset, indispensable for our work. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Next, we have FBI Deputy Director, Mr. Abate. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Yes, Senator.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Chair Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, and members of the committee. It is a privilege to be here because of the immense importance of this topic and the discussion to follow, and for the opportunity to have it in this public setting. As this distinguished panel of colleagues has already done a thorough job of covering so much of what is vitally important about the collective FISA Section 702 authority, I will try to provide insight into the FBI's use of the tool, how we act based on the critical intelligence gleaned from it, and the actions we have taken and continue to take to ensure strict compliance with its use. With respect to the threats we face, as you are all aware, Section 702 is invaluable within our cyber program as it counters malicious activity from adversaries such as China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, among others. It is also a critical authority for the counterintelligence program, which relies on it to thwart the work of hostile foreign intelligence services, including each of the lawless authoritarian regimes just mentioned. And our counterterrorism operators depend on it to stop foreign terrorists, those who detest American values, freedom, and our way of life, and who seek to attack our country, take lives, and cause harm. As we've learned from the past, if the 702 tool is lost and we have to rely on traditional FISA moving forward, it would be next to impossible to keep pace with the foreign threats we face today. With that, we know many very real and legitimate concerns have been raised about the Bureau's use of 702, particularly as it relates to querying the limited subset of 702 data relating to the FBI's national security investigations. I want to be clear about my own views on the compliance incidents that were cited in the FISA court's opinion from last year, which was just recently declassified. They are wholly and completely unacceptable, and they do not reflect the high standards that we seek to hold ourselves to in the FBI. I know Director Wray and the entire leadership team feel the same way. It is important to keep in mind that all the incidents cited in that 2022 FISA court opinion predated a set of major reforms that the FBI instituted in 2021 and 2022 that were designed to address the root causes and eliminate incidents like these, from changes in our IT systems to our internal approval processes to training and to accountability. These reforms have already had significant positive impacts. We've seen a 94% drop in U.S. person queries overall, and our Office of Internal Auditing found a 14 percentage point increase in our compliance rate from before the reforms to after. It is now at approximately 96%. What is vital to remember is that there are incredibly important national security and public safety reasons for the FBI to query U.S. persons in FISA holdings. This was a fundamental lesson derived by both the 9/11 Commission and the Fort Hood Commission. We must share information across the intelligence community so that we can connect the dots, and then we must be able to find the relevant pieces of information in our databases in time to be able to take action to neutralize the threat. U.S. person queries are used to identify those who are actively working with foreign terrorist organizations or hostile intelligence services with intent to harm U.S. national security and threaten the lives of those who we serve. And we also use these queries to determine if those U.S. persons are current or potential victims targeted by those foreign powers. And if they are victims, we use U.S. person queries to investigate the extent of that targeting and can use that information to protect and warn the U.S. person or organization. But it's not enough to say that queries like these are valuable to our mission to protect the homeland. The American people and Congress also need to have trust and confidence that these queries are being done lawfully and in a fully compliant manner. It is our obligation to rebuild and to earn that trust. As the FBI official responsible for personally approving some of the most sensitive queries, I take these compliance errors very seriously and find them entirely unacceptable. It is difficult to express strongly enough in words how disappointed I am in these failures. And so in response to these and other incidents, I'm announcing today 2 additional new measures we will be taking to hold personnel accountable for FISA-related compliance incidents. First, I have issued new accountability procedures which establish a 3-strike policy for query compliance incidents deemed to be unintentional, with a range of rapidly escalating consequences and even stronger disciplinary action for those incidents deemed deliberate, reckless, or particularly egregious. Penalties based on the facts range up to dismissal from the agency. Second, the FBI has developed a new business health measure to hold our leadership accountable for monitoring FISA compliance within their field offices and divisions. This is one of the measures our leaders will be evaluated on when it comes time for performance ratings, awards, and promotions. Because it is not enough to simply hold the line-level employees accountable. We strive to ensure that we have accountability at every level throughout the organization. You have an absolute and complete commitment from Director Wray and I that we will continue this progress and work within the bounds of legislated authority. Because as crucial as 702 authority is now, it will only become more important over the next 5 years. As foreign cyber attacks continue to escalate in sophistication and frequency, as foreign terrorist organizations continue to reconstitute and pose resurgent threats to the homeland, and as we venture further into an era of heightened global strategic competition. So thank you again for inviting us to this important hearing and for your continued support of the FBI and our close partners represented here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abate. Mr. Olson.
Thank you, Chair Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, members of the committee. As you have just heard, Section 702 is invaluable. The reauthorization of 702 is perhaps the single most consequential national security decision that this Congress will make. The stakes could not be higher. Congress enacted Section 702 as part of a number of fundamental legal reforms following 9/11. Those attacks demonstrated that we must, 1, share intelligence, and 2, that we must eliminate walls between foreign intelligence collection and domestic law enforcement. I was part of the team at the Department of Justice in 2008 that worked with Congress to pass Section 702. Congress then recognized that FISA, as written, created a dangerous intelligence gap and enacted 702 on a bipartisan basis. And when Congress passed 702, it also included a number of critical safeguards for Americans. The law, for example, prohibits targeting anyone inside the United States or a U.S. person anywhere in the world. The FISA court reviews Section 702 procedures every year to ensure that they comply with the Constitution and with FISA. And the National Security Division, which I lead, reviews every single targeting decision that's made. In my experience, Section 702 is a model piece of legislation, an authority that both protects national security and safeguards civil liberties. So let me address one area of particular concern, and that's the FBI's use of Section 702 information. To use the intelligence that the IC collects lawfully, agents and analysts, quote, query the database of FBI information. This is the small subset of 702 data that is relevant to open FBI national security investigations. A query simply means using a term to retrieve specific information that already is in the FBI's possession. It's like searching for something in your email inbox. You don't read every single email. You probably enter a keyword to find what you're looking for quickly within what's already stored in your inbox. And the FBI's ability to do this, to conduct these queries, is absolutely essential to its mission. For example, if the FBI learns that a spy working for the PRC has a list of U.S. phone numbers on their phone, FBI investigators may query FBI 702 data with those phone numbers. Some of them may be U.S. phone numbers, to help identify others working for the PRC or even potential victims of PRC espionage. And this is not just hypothetical. The FBI, in fact, was able to disrupt ongoing assassination and kidnapping plots, in part because FBI investigators searched their 702 data with U.S. person identifiers, and they were able to therefore quickly discover the nature and extent of the plotting. In another case, the FBI was investigating a cyber attack against a critical infrastructure company here in the United States. The FBI queried its Section 702 data with U.S. person identifiers, and they found out that it was Chinese hackers that were behind the attack and that they had compromised the network, and they figured out how they did it. It was this information that the FBI got from querying its data that allowed the FBI to alert the network operators and to mitigate the attack. Ultimately, the FBI is the single organization represented here with the responsibility and the authority to take action inside the United States to protect our national security, whether that's to identify and disrupt terrorism attacks, espionage, or cyber threats. And the FBI's ability to quickly review its Section 702 data is an essential tool for that mission. The FBI, however, must safeguard the rights of Americans. In recent years, we have identified and reported serious compliance issues with FBI's U.S. person queries. And let me be clear, I join with Deputy Director Abate. These compliance problems are not acceptable. They have eroded public trust, and I am not here to defend them. Indeed, when we identified these problems, the Attorney General directed the FBI to make significant changes to their systems and their policies and their training, changes that have already proven effective in improving compliance. But this is an ongoing process, and as the Deputy Director testified, the FBI is imposing new measures for compliance and new measures for accountability. And we are continuing to review the FBI's performance for ways to improve. We are committed to working with you and with the rest of Congress on potential reforms. As we work with you on this effort, we must ensure that any changes we make also preserve Section 702's essential effectiveness as a national security tool. In the end, we must not forget the lessons of 9/11. Unduly limiting the FBI's ability to access lawfully collected information and imposing artificial barriers between foreign intelligence and criminal investigations will set us back decades. It will put our nation at grave risk. Section 702 has proven to be an irreplaceable authority that enables our entire intelligence community to work together to collect and to share and to use the information that's necessary to protect our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Before I start the questioning, I'll recognize Senator Graham for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Be very brief. The committee has heard pretty jarring testimony from people in the intelligence and law enforcement space that if Congress fails to reauthorize 702, that the country would be much at risk. And this program has been used to identify some pretty bad actors and take action on behalf of the United States. The abuses that you talked about, I'll talk to you about in a minute, but I guess what I'm trying to tell my constituents back home, the threats to the country are growing, they're not lessening. The ISIS Al-Qaeda footprint is coming back. China's up to no good at every front. The Iranians are threatening to kill former members of the Trump administration. And many of us have been briefed by the FBI based on pickups you've had regarding threats against us. And I would imagine that came from 702. That's the need for it. The downside is that it's been abused, and there's a warrant requirement to investigate an American citizen for potential wrongdoing, and we don't want this to be used to get around a warrant requirement. So bottom line is, let's reauthorize this program and build in some safeguards.
Thank you, Senator Graham. Before I begin my questions, I want to remind my colleagues that following this open session, we'll have a closed session in SVC 217 at 12 p.m. today, where you can pose questions that may not be able to be answered in open session. I'd like to start with questioning by just noting the following. I listened to how this program was described by our witnesses. Mr. Fanzone described it as an elegant program. Mr. Barnes described it as agile and specific. Mr. Cohen referred to precision. Mr. Olson, that it was irreplaceable and invaluable, and so forth. But since the last reauthorization of Section 702 in 2017, many violations of the constitutional, statutory, and court-imposed restrictions on Section 702 have come to light. Last month, an unsealed Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, or FISC, opinion revealed that the FBI conducted improper searches of 702 databases for American communications 278,000 times. 278,000 times. These searches have affected all manner of Americans, such as individuals listed in police and homicide reports, including victims, next of kin, and witnesses to the crime. 133 people were arrested during the 2020 Black Lives Matter protest when, as Justice Department itself concluded, quote, there was no specific factual basis to think the searches would turn up foreign intelligence. And 19,000 donors to congressional campaigns when, quote, the only 8 identifiers used in the query had sufficient ties to foreign influence activities to allow such a search. 8 out of 19,000. Mr. Abate and Mr. Olson, you both testified regarding the remedial measures that have been implemented or are underway, but why should Congress or the American people trust the executive to comply with the law this time in light of this track record?
Thank you, Chair Durbin. I'll first take the question and then pass it off to the Deputy Director. As we both said, the problems that you've cited and that we've identified in our reviews of the FBI queries are not acceptable, and I don't defend them. I'm not here to do that. What I can tell you is that those problems predate the critical remedial measures that were put in place in 2021 and 2022. In particular, the FBI made a simple change to its system at the Attorney General's direction. Instead of, by default, when there was a query conducted by an FBI analyst or agent, searching all of its data, including FISA, raw FISA, and 702 data, it simply switched that to a default opt-in, so that from that point forward, starting in 2021, the FBI agent or analyst had to actually affirmatively take the step of saying, I'm going to conduct a search using a U.S. person identifier, and then say why that was reasonably likely to return foreign intelligence information. And it was that single change that has resulted primarily in the reduction of the number of U.S. person queries by 93% from 2021 to 2022. So it wasn't, again, these changes or these problems, these mistakes were not intentional. They were inadvertent. They're not defensible, but they were addressed largely by just simply requiring an affirmative step to search that data, because most of those searches were inadvertent. And if I may, one other point on the 278,000 number within the court opinion that you cited. Obviously, that's a huge number. The one thing to put that in some context, the one response to put that number in context, that doesn't represent each one of those a single wrongful query. Many of those queries were batch queries. In other words, multiple queries by one mistake, one agent making a mistake. In fact, one of those errors accounts for over 100,000 of the 278,000. So I think it's important to put that number, again, in context, again, not to defend or to excuse that mistake.
It's been a source of frustration since the creation of this program to get adequate accountability for the numbers, either on the positive side or the negative side. And you have to, I hope, understand why some of us are skeptical at this point, that 278,000 doesn't mean 278,000. I'm not sure where you're going with that. Let me just ask the basic fundamental question in the few seconds I have left. Is the skill of our adversaries and the potential destruction that they could bring to us by their malicious acts really made the Fourth Amendment something that we have to question whether we can follow it in the 21st century?
So again, the FBI is committed, the Department of Justice is committed to ensuring the safeguards are followed with regard to 702. There is no diminution of the Fourth Amendment when we're talking about U.S. person queries. In other words, the answer to your question is we do not need to dispense with the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment applies fully to everything we do. In fact, it's the hallmark of the work that we do when we investigate and prosecute cases is to follow the Fourth Amendment along with the rest of the Constitution. The courts that have looked at this, have looked at FISA 702 and FBI queries, no judge has said that there is a Fourth Amendment requirement for the FBI to query the data that's already lawfully collected. In fact, the courts that have looked at it have said there is no Fourth Amendment violation or requirement. There certainly are privacy implications here, and that's why we've adopted the changes that we've talked about, and that's why the FBI has today announced additional compliance measures, which again are already proving to be effective.
I can't go any further because I've run out of time, but I will tell you that if the reforms that you've mentioned in 2021 and 2022 are the only reforms that you're bringing to this committee as we discuss the future of 702, I've got to see more. I hope there is more that you can present. Senator Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just ask the panel to raise your hand if you agree with the following. The United States is in an undeclared state of war against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. You agree with that or not? Okay. All right. I think you raised your hands. That the Communist Chinese Party is hell-bent on infiltrating as many systems in America as possible. Okay. So let's talk about, I don't know if there's anybody named John Doe out there, but I don't know why you would name your kid John Doe. So let's talk about John Doe. If John Doe is suspected of working with the Chinese or some terrorist organization, do we all agree you'd have to get a warrant against John Doe if they were an American citizen? Everybody nods their head, right? If you think some American is colluding or working with some foreign power, that would be a crime, and you'd have to get a warrant to investigate them. Do we all agree with that? Okay. 702. This is about foreign persons outside the country. Is that correct? We're surveilling foreign people outside the United States, not to solve a crime, but to find out if they're up to no good in terms of intelligence gathering threats to the country. Is that correct? Here's the rub. You pick up a phone on the battlefield somewhere, and there's a bunch of names in that phone or numbers in that phone. I think you talked about this, Mr. Boddy, but let's just say you capture a terrorist somewhere overseas, and you have a mobile device, and on that device, there are names of Americans or numbers of Americans. What happens next?
We're going to quickly take those numbers, Senator. We're going to run them against the holdings. And,
Without a warrant?
If we're talking about FISA 702?
Yes.
Yes, if it's obtained from foreign terrorist?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the idea of not looking at those numbers is absurd. Why wouldn't you want to look at those numbers? Doing it in a constitutionally sound manner is what we're talking about. So what would you do? You would ask the system what?
We would be looking connections around the world, and specifically in the United States. We would want to know if that terrorist is working with someone
So if
in the
he
United
called
States.
John Doe in Cleveland, Ohio, and you pinged the system and there is communications between the terrorist device and John Doe in Cleveland, Ohio, what would you do next?
We would do all of the investigative steps that you would expect. Physical surveillance.
Would you have to get a warrant?
If we were going to seek technical surveillance on the U.S. person, absolutely, we would.
Okay. So if a terrorist is talking to someone inside the United States and we pick it up from 702, if you want to follow the American on the other end of the phone, you potentially would have to get a warrant. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. But just asking the question about whether or not there was a contact does not require a warrant. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So if an American is involved with a foreign person overseas, and there's evidence of an American being involved, we don't know what the nature of the involvement is, we like to know more. You can ask the system, but if you're really focusing on the American as being up to no good, you have to get a warrant. Is that fair to say?
That is correct, Senator. Once the focus turns to the U.S. person, the person inside the United States.
The only reason I mention this is that 702 is not designed to avoid a warrant requirement against people you have to get warrants for. Is that correct? The goal of 702 is to find out about what bad guys or bad girls may be up to overseas regarding us here at home, our interests throughout the world, and do something about it before it's too late. Is that the general nature of 702?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. Now, you're going to have to prove to this committee that when you query about American systems in that system, citizens in that system, that you're not just being lazy, getting around the law, and these abuses need to stop. So count me in with Senator Durbin. I want to know more about have guardrails. But to the members of this committee, if we lose this tool, we will pay a heavy price.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Olson, you and I were both engaged in that 2008 initial process back when I was on the Intelligence Committee as well as the Judiciary Committee. So let me just join Mr. Abate in his feelings of dismay that these errors have been allowed to take place. I've been a constant supporter of 702, and it's very frustrating years into the process to have these errors continue. You've mentioned, the panel has mentioned the role of 702 in finding out about atrocities committed by Russia in Ukraine. Can you tell me if that information has yet been shared with the International Criminal Court?
I'm not sure. I defer to my colleagues about whether it has or not.
The reason I'd like an answer to that is that this committee, Senator Graham, Chairman Durbin, saw to it that a law was passed lifting the ban on cooperation with the International Criminal Court as it regards specifically Russian atrocities in Ukraine. And our understanding from the last conversation we had was that the Department of Defense was stopping the executive branch from complying with that law passed by Congress. And if that is still the case, then we'd like an answer to that. So can we get an answer to that in a timely fashion for the committee?
Yes.
It's the law of the country for the executive branch to cooperate with the International Criminal Court as regards the investigation into Russian crimes. The failure of the executive branch to abide by that law, I believe, because of the recalcitrance of one agency, just isn't consistent with the way things are supposed to work in our democracy. So I hope that we've put an end to that problem or solved it, but if not, we're going to continue to press on that question. Mr. Olson, there are three areas that we've talked about with regards to 702. that are not presently in the 702 statute. One is its use to pursue the international organizations that are responsible for bringing fentanyl into the country and for thousands of American deaths. You are currently using the program to target those organizations, correct?
The program is being used, Senator, for the purpose of gaining intelligence on fentanyl distribution, focusing on individuals and groups outside the United States who are not U.S. persons.
So let me make a recommendation that you add to 702 a specific authorization for that purpose. I think that would be welcome. Second, you've announced a considerable number of repairs and reforms, including the FBI unclassified congressional notice that we received today. Those are all being accomplished administratively, correct?
That's correct at this point.
I would strongly recommend that you take as many of those as you feasibly can and bake them into the law. So work on an amendment that incorporates those reforms so that it now is part of the 702 law that we will be voting on. The third is that you have mentioned the role of 702 in supporting American victims of foreign intelligence breaches. Very often it's a company that is having information stolen out of it, often by PRC-related entities. And the way you find out about it is that through 702, you pick up the contact with the American company. Now you have the ability to go to the American company and say, hey, you have a problem, and help them defend themselves. Is that an accurate description of the way that transpires?
Absolutely, both through direct means as well as cyber means is the way we've seen those types of intrusions occur.
Yep. So I would also recommend that you add to 702 specific authority related to the support for American victims. There's no reason that should hide that aspect of the program under a bushel. And once it's part of the program, there's no doubt that that's a legitimate way for the executive branch to proceed. With that, my time is up. I thank you all for your service, and I yield back to the chairman.
Thanks, Senator Whitehouse. Senator Grassley.
Mr. Fonzone, you can't have meaningful discussions about reauthorizing 702 when government reports and court opinions are heavily redacted and hidden from the public. Will you commit to declassifying information about the FISA abuses and procedures before the 702 reauthorization deadline? And if you can't say yes to that, why not?
Yes, Senator, thank you. I think we've recently released a FISC opinion that declassified and a bunch of information, and the law already requires us to review FISC opinions for classification and release them to the public, and we're committed to making more information public about Section 702 to assist Congress and the public in its consideration of renewing this authority.
Mr. Olson, I heard you say in your opening statement about processes you're taking to make sure that people that are abused or people that abuse this process are going to be held accountable. You heard about the 278,000 times that it was violated. What is the Justice Department doing to punish folks who have already abused FISA?
Senator, thank you for that question. And again, compliance includes rules and procedures, but it only works if you have accountability. And that's why the FBI has instituted a comprehensive approach to accountability for the agents and analysts who use FISA but abuse the rules. It's on a spectrum. For intentional misuse, agents and analysts can be fired. In fact, one person was fired for wrongfully violating the rules intentionally with respect to FISA. But the vast majority of the mistakes we've seen are not intentional, and the FBI has announced today, Deputy Director Abate talked about a 3 strikes approach of escalating penalties that include notes in a personnel file, loss of access to FISA data, and other measures including retraining to ensure that individuals are tracked over time if they're repeat offenders. There's again a range of repercussions and discipline, and I know the Deputy Director and the Director of the FBI take this very seriously.
Okay. Mr. Abate, I'd like to have you describe for me the process and procedure that the FBI should normally follow when receiving criminal allegations from a trusted FBI source that an office holder engaged in bribery. For example, if the allegations include reference to evidence that would prove or disprove the bribery scheme, would standard procedure, operating procedure require the FBI to seek out that evidence?
Senator, in any instance where we receive information, an allegation, or a complaint, we apply the standards on the Attorney General guidelines and our DIOG and determine whether the information received, the allegation, the complaint meets the threshold for the opening of an investigation. We consult appropriately with our field office, with our program management elements at headquarters, with our Office of General Counsel, and then we take it from there based on the information, whether it meets the standard.
So that's the investigation process that should have been followed with respect to the 1023. Apparently that process wasn't followed. For the sake of restoring credibility, the FBI must explain itself sooner rather than later. Mr. Olson, this is my last question. The Washington Post reported your involvement in Mar-a-Lago raid. It wrote that, quote, FBI agents on the case worried that prosecutors were being overly aggressive. And further quote, Olson appealed to senior officials in FBI headquarters to push their agents to conduct the raid. Did you communicate with senior officials at FBI headquarters to push their agents to search Mar-a-Lago?
Senator, our solemn responsibility in every case is to follow the facts and the law, and to do so without fear and favor. We are absolutely committed to the impartial administration of justice and to upholding the rule of law, which includes applying the law equally to everybody. As I'm sure you can appreciate, that matter is under the auspices of the Office of the Special Counsel, and I'm not going to comment further on it.
Is the Washington Post right or wrong?
So that's a matter that's pending, and it's an ongoing matter, and it's being handled by the Office of the Special Counsel. So I'm sure you can understand that I'm not going to comment further.
Okay, thank you. I yield.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, all of you, for your good work. I'll start with you, Deputy Director Cohen. I know Senator Whitehouse asked Mr. Olson about the use of 702 when it comes to drug trafficking, and I wanted to kind of dig down on that just because we're seeing more and more fentanyl kill people, and also more available on the internet, sometimes, many times unknowingly, when people are purchasing other pills that shouldn't be on those platforms. Without getting into specifics, how is data collected under Section 702 been used to disrupt trafficking networks and prevent fentanyl and its precursor chemicals from entering our communities? What work is being done?
Thank you for that question, Senator Klobuchar. So we use Section 702 collection on foreign persons overseas, query the database to identify individuals tied to organizations that are involved in drug trafficking and in fentanyl production in particular. It helps us illuminate where the precursor chemicals are coming from, often from China, how those chemicals get to overseas, oftentimes to Mexico, not invariably, but oftentimes to Mexico, as well as how some of the pill presses that are used to manufacture fentanyl are acquired, again, overseas and brought into Mexico for use, including by organizations such as the Sinaloa cartel.
And I think that's really important to know for those just talking to families who've lost kids who purchasing drugs on the internet, that the platforms are being used by these cartels. You don't have to go into that, but these cartels are actually involved in this, so it's not like they can get all their justice in the U.S. And in order to stop this, we're going to have to stop it from coming in, the ingredients and some of the other substances. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator.
Okay. Deputy Director Abate, I appreciated Senator Durbin's words about making sure that these reforms continue and that I appreciated what you announced today and that there'll be changes to the existing 702 authority. Could you talk about how the reforms the FBI implemented resulted in measurable improvements in the FBI's compliance, number one, and then number two, is there a lag in the publicly available data such that the most recent FISC Section 702 certification does not accurately inform the public?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, with respect to the reforms that we've already put in place, as the Assistant Attorney General noted, we've seen significant progress. Just the one that Mr. Olson cited on having our personnel opt in year over year resulted in a 90-something% decrease in overall U.S. person queries. So we've seen significant progress there, along with the other reforms that we've implemented. On batch queries, which are anything more than one, we had put in place a requirement that for any batch queries over 100, it require attorney review from our Office of General Counsel. I've taken that even further now because I saw some recent examples, again, where I was disappointed in the compliance error. So we've actually cut that down now so that any batch query of any number is going to require attorney review from our Office of General Counsel going forward. We're also requiring written justifications for our personnel when they're endeavoring to make a U.S. person query. And we're going to continue to iterate on that. We view it as an ongoing process, and we're open to any and all further reforms in working with the committee and members here. And we're not going to stop until we've achieved 100% compliance.
Okay. I was going to ask Mr. Olson if you wanted to add anything, but before that, quick, how has the FBI used Section 702 to critical infrastructure and businesses to protect them from ransomware and other cyber threats? Because we certainly have been seeing a surge in those.
Yes, Senator. As we said, it's a vital tool. Some examples have already been provided. It's with regularity that we see that. It's helped us literally identify potential victims in the United States, both individuals and companies who are either being targeted for cyber attack or in the midst of an attack, already have been. It's allowed us to get in front of that, particularly with regard to our critical infrastructure, to warn victim companies before they're hit and prevent the harm from occurring from adversaries like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. And it's been, without it, we would not have been able to achieve that goal. And,
Okay,
to
because
protect
you've
our
had some
country,
major
protect people.
prosecutions. Could I just, just ask Mr. Olson, it appeared he had something you wanted to add on the reform front?
If I may, just two quick points, Senator. One, on your cyber question, one example is the notorious Colonial Pipeline attack, where 702 collection helped us both identify the hacker and it enabled us to recover most of the ransom money that had been paid. Secondly, your question about the certification and the FISC opinions, there is a 2023 opinion that is now going through the declassification process that will come out shortly, and which does identify some additional improvements in FBI compliance. Not 100%, there are still problems and things that we're still working on. That's part of the deal, but it does identify that the FBI has continued to improve its compliance over the past year.
Okay, thank you very much.
Senator Cornyn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I haven't heard anyone say that 702 is not essential to our national security. And I believe it is essential to our national security, so I'm delighted to hear that people are saying that, not claiming that we can do away with it, but what you're also hearing is a lot of skepticism, even distrust of the intelligence community based on abuses that have been well documented. And as you know, once that trust is lost, it's hard to earn it back. So we're at a little bit of a crossroads here. I'll remind you that it was just a few years ago where we tried to reauthorize Section 215 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and were unable to build a political consensus to do that. So I do believe your testimony that this is important to our national security. So the question is, how do we work together to regain the public's trust and the confidence of members of Congress will be asked to vote in favor of some reforms. Mr. Abate, just you've talked about the work that's been done at the FBI, and I had the opportunity to go look at how the FBI's reforms, not the ones you mentioned today, but the others, in terms of querying FISA information, how those work. Would you have, or the FBI director, have any objection if those reforms that you've announced, that the FBI's announced, were codified and written into the law as opposed to just policies of the agency?
Thank you, Senator, first for visiting with us at FBI headquarters and taking the time. We would not have any objection at all from the FBI standpoint to codifying any and all of the reforms that we put in place and future ones as well.
And Mr. Abate, I was struck by the fact that when the FBI is doing an investigation, an agent's not just sitting down and doing a query of foreign intelligence information lawfully collected. You're actually engaged in querying more than 100 different databases. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator. I don't know the exact number of databases, but we do have quite a few.
And so this is not agents sitting down and just looking at foreign intelligence surveillance. They're looking for all the data points to be able to put together an investigation into potential intelligence vulnerabilities or to pursue perhaps crimes. So there has been some suggestion, and I'll throw this open maybe to Mr. Olson. There's something known as Executive Order 12333, which again, by definition, is something that the President of the United States has done without congressional input or interaction. But there's been a question raised as whether, if 702 were to go away, does Executive Order 12333 provide the tools necessary to protect our country?
I'll answer, and maybe Mr. Fonzone might have an answer to this as well in his role as general counsel for the DNI. But the short answer, Senator, is no. And the reason the answer is no, and flatly no, is that Executive Order 12333 does not allow for the critical piece that 702 does, and that is compelling the support and compliance of private electronic communication service providers. In other words, the real genius behind Section 702 was, yes, it's focused outside the United States on non-U.S. persons, but it also allows the government to compel the assistance of a provider inside the United States, which are often the ones that are providing support or communication support to the individuals that we're targeting outside the U.S.
Mr. Cohen, obviously Congress is very much engaged on a bipartisan basis in supporting the Ukrainian people in light of the Russian invasion of their country. And the other sort of major issue that seems to enjoy broad bipartisan consensus is defending our country against the aggression of the People's Republic of China. Could you speak to how 702 is important in terms of both of those matters?
Senator Cornyn, I will say for both of those efforts, 702 is involved. I can go into more detail when we go into closed session, but we and with our colleagues in the intelligence community rely on 702 to identify foreign intelligence information that is useful for our analytic work in providing products to Congress and to the administration in the Ukraine context, understanding what's happening there, as well as a whole host of products that we write with respect to the challenge that we're facing from the People's Republic of China. But I'm happy to go into more detail in the closed session.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Cornyn. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I will be interested in hearing how 702 has been useful with respect to both Ukraine and China. I can certainly understand as to China. I wonder if you could give us a little bit more, even in this public setting, about how it's been important to our assistance to Ukraine in its fight against Russia's criminal, murderous aggression.
So let me take a shot at that, but mindful that I do think that some of the real substance would be better discussed in closed session. And so what I will say, and picking up a little bit on the answer to the prior question, is that our adversaries, whether they're Russians, Chinese, Iranians, North Koreans, terrorist organizations, make use of U.S. communications service providers. And if there is a reason for believing that we have some foreigner operating overseas who is using a communication service that is provided by a U.S. service provider, we, or more likely the NSA, will target that foreign person overseas to collect the intelligence collect those communications. We can then query the database of information that is collected on those foreign persons overseas. We run queries, NSA runs queries, obviously FBI runs queries against this database of information that is collected when it is reasonably likely to retrieve foreign intelligence information. And we do that in the Ukraine context, we do that in the context of the People's Republic of China, and in other contexts where we have national security.
And in the Ukraine context, we can play a part in supporting Ukraine through sharing our intelligence, correct?
There's a whole host of ways in which we're supporting the Ukrainian government with intelligence sharing, and it involves the full swath of collection that the United States is involved in.
Let me ask you, as you may know, and I think we've talked about it in our conversations in my office, I've been a longtime advocate of some more robust adversarial process within the Section 702 FISA procedure. In 2015, Congress took an important step in codifying the amicus responsibility. My numbers are from 2015 to 2020, there were 1,200 FISA applications, but just 19 amicus appointments. And in 2017, the only amicus at the time with significant criminal defense experience in the FISA context resigned because he hadn't been assigned to a single case. Those numbers tell me that the present amicus process is not providing really robust or sufficient adversarial procedure. When we all know as lawyers that our justice system thrives on the adversarial procedure. This area is the one part of our justice system where we have no such adversarial process because the subjects of 702 collection likely will never learn that they've been the subject of this process. So what is your position on this issue? I think I know what it is, but I'd like you to state it for the record, if you would, sir.
Senator, is that a question for Mr. Olson or for me?
Whoever would like to answer.
Why don't I turn it over to Mr. Olson, who
I'm happy to answer that
litigation.
question, Senator. I represent lead the National Security Division. We represent the government before the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, so we're directly involved in the process that you described. First, we are open to reforms, as I said at the beginning, that preserve the essential effectiveness of Section 702. So if there are reforms, for example, to the FISA court process, we're happy to engage with you and other members of Congress as we think through how those would work. When it comes to the amicus process, the FISA court can ask for an amicus to be appointed in any case, and they do so in any case involving a novel or complex interpretation of FISA. And that's the cases that are the hard cases, where they do have an adversarial process through the amicus appointment. The vast majority of FISA applications are basically the same as the ex parte process that occurs in a Title III criminal application, which is not an adversarial process, but rather criminal.
It's not, but eventually there is likely to be a challenge.
That's correct.
And in this instance, there's likely to be no challenge. And so the privacy interests arise not only where there's some new, major, novel interpretation of law, but as you well know, you know a lot more than I do at least, the case-by-case decisions often turn on interpretations of law that are challengeable. And that's why an adversarial process would provide a lot of reassurance, I think, to this committee and the American people.
Again, we're open to having this conversation and engaging with you on this. It is my view that the vast majority of FISA applications are basically facts against the probable cause standard. They don't involve novel interpretations of the law, and they are done on a level of with a degree of urgency, multiple times a week, that does not lend itself to the sort of adversarial back and forth process that an amicus would introduce, and so there's some serious risk to having, for example, an amicus in every case.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Lee?
Over the past 12 and a half years, I've raised significant concerns in hearing after hearing after hearing about FISA and the FBI's shocking disregard for Americans' constitutional rights and civil liberties. I've been given basically the same answer by FBI directors and attorneys general and other officials during 3 presidential administrations involving both major political parties. The answer every time is a variation, more or less, of the following: just trust us. Don't worry. We've got good people, law-abiding people running this, and we've got lots and lots of procedural safeguards in place to prevent this type of abuse that you're facing here. These aren't the droids you're looking for. That's what we're told. Here again today, just the last 24 hours, we got a new policy. This one's finally going to fix it, you tell us. This one's going to do it. Meanwhile, what's happened? Well, in 2019, Inspector General Horowitz issued a shocking report confirming a lot of what I had feared over the years, but had found it difficult to prove. A report regarding Crossfire Hurricane, the FBI's secret surveillance of Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. And then a subsequent memorandum dealing with the FBI's failure to maintain these so-called Woods files, which Woods file is basically the evidentiary record underlying a FISA order request in violation of FBI policy. Year after year, and hearing after hearing, we hear of instances of noncompliance, including the disclosure just last month that the FBI illegally surveilled 19,000 donors to a congressional campaign. Americans participating in protests in the summer of 2020, Americans who were in Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021, and even a sitting member of Congress. Hundreds of thousands of searches of Americans' private communications and information are conducted each and every year without a probable cause warrant. Frankly, without any warrant if conducted under Section 702. Now, let me be very clear. That number should not just be going down. That number should be 0. Every quote-unquote non-compliant search involving U.S. persons violates an American citizen's constitutional rights. And yet every year, the FBI claims that we should just trust the FBI to fix the problems internally. Well, first they tell us there are no problems. Then they tell us we will fix them because we've got good people and we've got new policies. At this time it's going to be different. Only later we find out that the FBI conducted more and more illegal searches in violation of Americans' constitutional rights than the last time we addressed the issue. So it's hard not to conclude that the only thing the FBI wishes it could fix here is the possibility of getting caught. This is what I find so insufferable
This is what I find so incredibly insulting. Look, I want to echo Senator Blumenthal's point a minute ago, and I hope every American can take note of this feature of this. This is unlike other court proceedings. We call it a court, and yet it doesn't have any of the trappings of an ordinary court. There is no adversarial process. We're told a moment ago by Mr. Olson that it's okay. It's okay because the FISA court has the ability to appoint an amicus anytime it feels necessary to do so. Well, why not in every case? And even if there is an amicus, what interest does the amicus have that's on par with the individuals affected? The bottom line is you collect all this data, and then after you store all that data, some of it involving communications, the content of individual phone calls, emails, text messages, whatever it is, the content, not just the metadata, but the content. You can do a backdoor search on that without a warrant predicated on probable cause. That is itself an affront to the Constitution. That is itself something that is always going to lead to constitutional violations, and it must stop. We've got an opportunity this year to make necessary reforms, and we must do it. But while we've got you here, Mr. Olson and Mr. Abate, why should we ever trust the FBI and the DOJ when it comes to this issue, whether under the current administration or under a future leadership? Why should we ever trust the FBI and the DOJ, again, to police themselves under FISA when they've shown us repeatedly for more than a decade that they cannot be trusted to do so?
Senator, thank you for the question. Obviously, Section 702 is an invaluable intelligence tool. That's beyond dispute. It's also one that's very powerful, and it must be used responsibly. And I share the frustration that you express with the lack of compliance that we've seen in past years from the FBI. I'm not here to defend those compliance problems. What I can tell you is that those compliance problems predate some of the very significant changes that the FBI has put in place. I will not say that compliance problems will be zero next year. We are not saying it, as I think you mentioned, that we say we're done. This is an ongoing process. We will continue to try to improve. We will work with you and your staff and other members of Congress to make sure that we're implementing procedures and policies, training, and other measures to continue to drive down these errors and compliance problems. But in the end, the tool itself is so incredibly important to our national security that I believe that its essential effectiveness must be preserved.
Mr. Abate?
Senator, thank you. I share your concerns as well, and I take this seriously. And with regard to the FISA 702, since I've been in this role and under the leadership of Director Wray, we've made significant changes, ones that have never been made before, and there has been a lot of progress, but we're not going to rest on our laurels. We're going to keep driving ahead, continue to implement reforms as required, taking guidance and counsel from the committee and other members. With regard to Crossfire Hurricane, what happened there was wholly unacceptable. We agree with the findings set forth by Inspector General Horowitz and Special Counsel Durham. We've acknowledged that in the past, and that's 2017 and earlier that conduct occurred, not under Director Wray's leadership or when I was in this position. We have an entirely new leadership team. We've implemented very strong corrective actions, the poor decision-making, the grave errors of judgment, the misconduct, the lack of rigor investigatively that occurred there, totally unacceptable. We reject it. We hold people accountable for that now. And everything that we've done on the work, on the mission since that time, we've worked to avoid those mistakes and apply the lessons learned of the past. And anyone we find who goes against that, they are not going to work in the FBI and they will be held accountable for that period.
Great to know. Congress has got to fix this problem and stop trusting the surveillance state to fix it. It can't, it won't. We know that because it hasn't.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I share your concerns about the regarding U.S. person queries without warrants and the concerns expressed by a number of my other colleagues. So this is one of the reasons that I have not been able to vote for reauthorizing 702. And when I'm thinking about a warrant in this context, I am thinking about something much less involved than a typical FISC order, and much more like the search warrants that are issued in countless courthouses in our country every day. Last year, federal magistrate judges considered over 140,000 search warrants. Probable cause is not a high bar, and magistrate judges are used to evaluating it. Different provisions of FISA already allow federal magistrate judges to issue certain FISA orders, and I would support a discussion about expanding that authority to this context. For Mr. Olson, so you've had a chance to, we have met to talk about why can't we have a warrant requirement. The department opposes a warrant requirement because you argue that many of the queries are done before the FBI has probable cause, which says to me that if you had to meet a probable cause requirement, that would already decrease the number of applications. So do you have any reaction to the idea of using federal magistrate judges in a warrant requirement process?
Thank you, Senator, and I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you and your staff and to discuss these important issues. The warrant requirement that has been discussed when it comes to Section 702, I think is not workable and not legally required, and let me explain why. First, every judge that's looked at this issue, every federal judge, including judges on the FISA court, have concluded that a warrant is not required under the Fourth Amendment for searching the lawfully collected data that is in the FBI holdings. So there's no legal requirement, but putting that aside, because there are indeed privacy and civil liberties implications to the FBI searching with the U.S. person identifier. The fundamental problem is that such an approach would be unworkable, and I go back to the hypothetical that Senator Graham described, which is assume the military, our military obtains a cell phone in Syria, and that cell phone has 100 phone numbers on it. 30 of them are U.S. phone numbers, and the person that they get it from is a suspected ISIS member who's plotting against the United States. There may not be, in fact, likely wouldn't be probable cause to search those phone numbers in the FBI database. But with time being of the essence, it's absolutely critical that the FBI, along with other components within the intelligence community, take those phone numbers and determine whether or not we have an ISIS operator inside the United States who's plotting an attack. So we would not have probable cause. We wouldn't be able to take that step. It's not legally required. And if we were required, the sheer number of such requests would simply overwhelm the system. There's no number of FISA court judges or even magistrates who would have clearances, for example, who could possibly manage the number of queries. So it's both not legally required and it's not workable, and it wouldn't protect us.
You mentioned that all of the courts that have addressed the issue of Fourth Amendment issues, that they have all found that Section 702 does not require such warrants, but I have information that that is actually not the case. I don't know what specific questions were before particular courts, but several judges, including a unanimous panel of the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, have raised constitutional concerns. And you note that you would want a U.S. person inquiry in the instance where there is a definite connection with a terrorist, for example, but how do you justify the querying of American protesters, for example, or people who have made contributions? I think that the 702 is way too broad. It does raise constitutional questions, and I'm just searching for some way that is not going to stop the legitimate reasons for why we need 702, but also to address the constitutional questions. And it occurs to me that maybe having magistrate judges who are very used to determining probable cause can be utilized in this regard, so that we don't have the situation of protesters' information being accessed or political contributors that has no connection to terrorists, for example. So, I am hopeful that we can figure out a way to find some way. I think I heard you say that you're okay with some reforms, and I know that the FBI recently put in a new procedure called, where you record the justification for all U.S. person queries. I would be interested to know what kind of recordation is it, and who determines whether justification was there. So perhaps maybe you can give me a little bit of enlightenment as to what this record the justification is.
Yes, Senator.
Abate?
Yes, within our system, the automated system, when the FBI employee who's seeking to do the query, the written justification has to be input into the system, and it's retained there in the records and recoverable forever with respect to that query. And we're making the system adaptations right now to fully put that into place and ensure that those records are retained and that they're reviewable and auditable.
My time is up, but I would have a concern as to whether there is any kind of a third-party, independent third-party person who reviews whether there was justification. Thank you,
If I
Mr.
may,
Chief.
just very briefly, Senator, that's in fact what the lawyers in the National Security Division do. The lawyers who work for me do exactly those audits of the FBI queries. About half the field offices each year, we review all of the queries that were done, and we review those justifications, those written justifications, to ensure that they meet the legal standard for searching the data. So again, I appreciate your interest and look forward to working with you further on this.
Senator Kennedy is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my comments will be directed to Mr. Abate. Am I saying that right?
Yes, Senator.
And Mr. Olson, perhaps to all of you. No fair-minded person can doubt the efficacy of Section 702. But here's the problem you've got. Just when the FBI, which I think is the most effective law enforcement agency in all of human history. But people are people, and just when the FBI has rebuilt itself after former Director Hoover, along comes Mr. Ray's predecessor, who clearly did not understand how to exercise power either intelligently or maturely. He decides to investigate in a public way not only one, but both candidates for President of the United States, and to do it publicly, and to leak like the Titanic. He investigates the Republican nominee with the flimsiest of evidence that has been manufactured that he, the FBI director at that time, didn't even bother to examine. And then he turns to the Democratic nominee with respect to her email servers, investigates her, calls a press conference, says, well, I am not going to prosecute her, but she needs to clean up her act. She's been negligent. And then a little time goes by, and he opens up the investigation again in a public way on the Democratic nominee and says, I'm opening this up. And a few days later, he closes it down. Might have cost her to the election. And then we start having reports, predictably, come out after that, the Durham report, the Mueller report, the Horowitz report. And it did extraordinary damage to the FBI and, frankly, to the Department of Justice. Now, Mr. Ray, who I supported to replace Mr. Comey, has said he has reformed the FBI. We just don't know how. We have no idea. I don't have any idea. I do know stuff keeps happening. I mean, one of your agents that was involved in the Mr. Hunter Biden's investigation goes on social media, apparently for a long period of time, and trashes all Republicans. He got fired only because Senator Grassley caught him. And all this hurts you. And it makes a fair-minded American look at this and go, whoa, you know, this is enormous power you have, and it can be used for the greater good, but it also can hurt people. And we've got to come up with a way to make sure that the right people are using this law enforcement tool. And that's the problem you got, gentlemen. If I were you, I'm not. I don't have your expertise, and I thank you all for your service. But if I were you, I'd try to be coming up with a way to suggest to Congress how you can check this power that you have, so that the FBI and the Department of Justice and the other agencies can regain their reputation. And tell us what you think. That doesn't mean we won't come with our own ideas. You know, senators don't take orders. Most of them barely take suggestions. But it would be helpful to me if you would come up with your own ideas to address these concerns, not just our concerns, but the concerns of the American people. I don't want to live in a country where if the FBI knocks on your door, the first thing you have to do is wonder whether the agent is a Republican or a Democrat. And thanks to Mr. Ray's predecessor, that's where we are, folks. I know that's a cold dish of truth, but I think that's the truth. So I'm gonna read your testimony. I need to learn more about this, but help us figure out this problem. Thank you, gentlemen.
Chair Durbin has stepped out and left me to chair in his stead, and I'm also
I
next
like you
in
better.
line.
You're doing a hell of a job.
Not in public, Senator Kennedy, please.
You're doing a hell of a job.
Okay, so I have the privilege of sitting on both the Judiciary and Intelligence Committees. And let me just start by saying, I think there's no serious doubt about the collection value of this overarching authority. And the most important question that we need to be focused on at this hearing is U.S. person queries. That is the principal source of concern for me, and I think for many of my colleagues. And Mr. Olson, it's the case, is it not, that the FBI can query this database for U.S. person communications simply seeking evidence of a crime. It does not have to be a national security investigation, correct?
It is correct, Senator. Thank you for the question, that the FBI can search using a U.S. person identifier for either foreign intelligence or evidence of a crime, but there must be a reasonable basis to believe that there is information in the Section 702 data that would be responsive to such a query.
Yeah, why should there not be a warrant requirement for these searches, which are known as crime-only searches, whereby FBI agents are seeking the communications of Americans, either considering opening a criminal investigation or in the midst of a predicated criminal investigation? Why should there not be a warrant requirement for such a U.S. person query?
So stepping back for a moment, if I may, just to provide
Just for a moment.
Very quickly, Section 702 is a foreign intelligence tool. It's
Yes.
not a law enforcement
Right.
tool.
So why is it used for domestic law enforcement purposes?
It has been used exceedingly rarely where a query using a U.S. person identifier would have identified information that did not have a foreign intelligence purpose. So outside of the national security realm, not involving a terrorism or espionage or cyber, charge or
Yeah,
investigation.
so it can be used for this purpose, and it has been used for this purpose.
2022, it was 16 different times. 14 of those times where it was used for evidence of a crime only were where the U.S. government had an affirmative discovery obligation to search.
Well, we'll get into those numbers in a
Yep.
second, but it begs the question, if it's so rare as you state, why not go get a warrant?
I think the initial idea was that there would be occasions, perhaps, where an agent or an analyst would find evidence of a crime only, not national security information, in the 702 data and would want to be able to use that. And it has happened that an agent found evidence of child abuse while looking at Section 702 data. So pure evidence of a crime that they were
Different
then
case.
able
We're
to
talking
follow.
about seeking evidence of a crime only. We're not talking about encountering evidence of other crimes in the course of querying foreign intelligence information. We're talking about U.S. person queries whose sole purpose is investigating domestic crime. Why should that not require a warrant?
The reason for not requiring a warrant is that this is lawfully collected information that is in the FBI holdings, and to simply wall off the FBI, for example, in the child abuse context, from seeing that information and using it would prevent them from being able to follow
That's
up
a
on
different fact pattern. That's encountering evidence of a crime in the course of conducting foreign intelligence investigations. This is a question I think that the committee needs to look into. I want to talk about this question of justification. We got a document last night, about 12 hours before this hearing, announcing some new reforms. I want to read back something that you said to Chair Durbin in this hearing. You said, starting in 2021, the FBI agent or analyst had to actually affirmatively take the step that I'm going to conduct a search using a U.S. person identifier and then say why that was reasonably likely to return foreign intelligence information. This is the justification for the query that has to be entered into the system. But it's the case, isn't it, that until 12 hours ago, when we received this, they only had to enter that justification if they actually looked at the results. They did not have to enter that justification to enter the query, correct?
That's correct. It was only if there was responsive information from the query. At that point, there would be the obligation to
Right, so they
justify.
can enter the query, and they're going to see substantive information before they view the full results. Aren't they going to see a number of results? They may see some metadata. They may even see some preview content, correct?
I don't believe that there would be any opportunity to review any content of what was produced in response to the query before entering the justification.
No metadata.
I'm not sure about that.
Well, it's metadata either way, isn't it? Because it reveals whether or not the U.S. person being investigated has had contact with anyone in the FBI's portion of the underlying 702 database, correct?
It may simply be sent. I don't know the exact answer.
So I'm out of time,
it may simply be a response that there is responsive information in the data, but nothing further.
I'm out of time, but let me just say, so as I said at the beginning, I don't have any doubt about the foreign intelligence value of this. But the U.S. person query aspect of this is really concerning to the Congress. I don't think you've effectively made the case that there shouldn't be a warrant requirement, whether or not it is constitutionally required for a U.S. person search that is crime only. And it undermines the feeling about transparency. When you and your colleagues making the rounds for the last few months about touting the reforms you've implemented have been explaining to us that, well, ever since the reforms were made, we have to state a justification for the query. When it turns out that you only had to state the justification for the query if you actually decided to look at what the search revealed. So U.S. person queries is an area ripe for statutory changes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Ossoff. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, every day when I'm home in Texas, I hear from Texans who are deeply dismayed about the growing politicization and weaponization of the Department of Justice and the FBI. If you are not, every one of you should be deeply concerned about the damage being done to the integrity of the institutions in which you operate. My office hears regularly from FBI agents and from assistant U.S. attorneys who are likewise concerned about the politicization and weaponization of the Department of Justice and the FBI, and this is profoundly damaging to the rule of law in our nation. Last month, a whistleblower brought to light the existence in the FBI of a report, an FD 1023, in which the informant alleges that President Biden and his family members engaged in a $5 million bribery scheme during his time as vice president. Deputy Director Abate, is it true that the FBI has a report making those allegations?
I'm not going to comment on that, Senator.
And why is that?
I'm just not going to comment on information we received, investigations, or
Do you owe an
ongoing matters.
obligation to the American people to be candid about evidence of corruption by the President of the United States?
This is an area that I'm not going to get into with you, Senator.
Well, I understand you don't want to, and that's why people are mad at the FBI, because you're stonewalling and covering up serious allegations of evidence of corruption from the president. Yesterday, Senator Chuck Grassley stood on the Senate floor and alleged that there are 17 recordings of this informant from Burisma, Ukrainian natural gas company. 15 of them are recordings, voice recordings of him talking to Hunter Biden. 2 of them are voice recordings of him talking to Joe Biden. Deputy Director Abate, does the FBI have 17 voice recordings laying out evidence of a bribery scheme?
Senator, I would add also that we've worked with the House Oversight Committee.
Yeah, this is the Senate. We're the other
document
side
that
of the Capitol. This is the Senate. Do you have those 17 recordings?
I'm not going to comment on any investigative matters, Senator.
See, that's the problem. The FBI, and I've had this conversation with Chris Wray too, this is why you are damaging the institution. The American people have a right to know whether there is serious, credible evidence that the President of the United States took a $5 million bribe. And by the way, if it's false, Chairman Durbin just rolled his eyes. If Chairman Durbin were interested in the rule of law, we would have a hearing on these allegations. But of course, the Democrats don't want a hearing on these allegations. And to be clear, if the allegations are false, you know who could disprove them? Joe Biden. He could call for this to be released publicly. But the FBI is stonewalling. Would you agree?
Two things, Senator. No
Sure.
one's stonewalling. The 1023
You just said you refused to answer the
was provided
question.
in response to a subpoena.
Okay,
to the
then why'd
House
you refuse
Oversight
to answer
Committee.
my question?
The pertinent information is there, and I reject your assertion that the
Why
FBI
did you
is
refuse to answer my
politicized.
question?
I just answered your question.
Okay, so yes, you have a 1023. Do you have the 17 recordings? Yes or no?
I'm not going to get further into that.
So you're stonewalling. You can't say I'm not refusing to answer your question, but I won't answer your question.
I'm going to answer within the parameters that we operate in.
That's the problem. The FBI has right now an unlimited hubris that you believe you are unaccountable. You don't believe you're accountable to the United States Congress, and you don't believe you're accountable to the American people. And you are doing damage. The FBI is a great institution. When I go home to Texas, people ask me, should we abolish the FBI? Now, I tell them no, because you have heroes and patriots working for you that are catching child predators, that are catching terrorists. But you're sitting there happily erecting a wall to protect Joe Biden. Will you provide to this committee, not the House, the Senate Judiciary Committee, will you provide the FD 1023 and will you provide the 17 recordings so we can assess what is the evidence, the specific credible evidence that Joe Biden personally took a $5 million bribe from a foreign national?
Senator, we will work with this committee, you and other members, to provide the information within the parameters of the process.
Will you provide the FD 1023, yes or no?
I will take that back, and we will work with our
So you're not
chamber.
answering that. Will you provide the 17 recordings?
We will take that back, and we'll work with you.
So
and
you're
your
not
staff.
answering that either. Did you investigate in any way, shape, or form these allegations?
Senator, once again, I'm not going to comment.
So
on
you're not going to
investigative-
say whether you did your job?
We do our job to the very best of our ability.
Well, not here. You're not answering a single question to the American people. And you may think this is esoteric. I promise you, millions of Americans are concerned. You know who isn't concerned? Not a single Senate Democrat. We're going to go through this whole hearing. Not one Democrat will ask a question about this. You know who else isn't concerned? The corporate media, who is joining with the Democrats in covering up this evidence. If Joe Biden is innocent, the evidence should be made public and demonstrate that he's innocent. But if he is not, is it true this informant who alleged that he personally took a bribe was an informant the FBI had relied upon previously in other investigations? Yes or no?
Senator, in each and every investigation that we have, all the work that we do,
I asked you
the
a yes or no
expectation
question.
is that every logical avenue of investigation be pursued
I asked you a
to
yes
its
or no
fullest.
question. Are you going to answer it?
Yeah, I'm answering your question.
Was the informant one you had relied on previously in other investigations? Yes or no?
Senator, we run down every piece of information, every
You're not
lead,
answering it then. You're refusing to answer
objectively,
it. So you're refusing to answer the
to
question.
the fullest extent possible,
You're refusing to answer the question.
Senator,
Is
your
that
time
correct?
has
aggressively in all
expired.
instances.
Senator, your
It's
time is
disgraceful. It's disgraceful, Deputy Director Abate. Disgraceful.
Senator, your time has expired. Senator Tilts?
Chairman, I think Senator Blackburn goes before me, or Senator Welch. I appreciate the opportunity, but.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. It's Senator Welch is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all the witnesses. I'm sitting in a seat that was previously occupied by Senator Leahy, who is a champion of civil liberties and a strong supporter of law enforcement, his own prosecution background. But he, and with the great support of Vermonters, very much was concerned about the civil liberty questions that are raised. And I've heard from all of the witnesses, you share that concern. And I certainly do. What Chairman Durbin said in his opening remarks in expressing his very serious concern about the extraordinary breaches, I share that. So a couple of things. One, Senator Cornyn had asked about codifying in statute reforms that have been made. In my understanding, I think this goes to you, Mr. Olson, is that you would be supportive of any of the reforms that have made to date being codified in statute, so it wasn't another episode of trust me and we'll try to get it right?
No, I think that's exactly as the Deputy Director said. I mean, the fundamental point is we are open to engaging on reforms and implementing reforms that don't undermine the essential effectiveness of Section 702. Certainly.
But codifying them.
And among those would be, right, putting in statute where it makes sense to do so, some of the changes or the changes that the FBI has implemented on its own to ensure compliance.
I just want to make certain that we're on the same page
Yes.
here, because it's one thing to say, trust us, we've learned and we'll be good in the future. It's another thing to have the force of law behind it. Second
If I may
thing,
just say, I'm being a little, I'm hesitating only because as the lawyer here next to Mr. Abate, I just want to make sure that, we'd want to make sure that the language in any statute is
well,
appropriate,
no,
of course.
that goes without saying.
Yep.
Now, another thing, I know Senator Leahy and Senator Lee, I'm sorry. Okay, Senator Leahy and Senator Lee worked on an amicus amendment, as I understand it. Senator Lee, and by the way, he very much appreciated working with you on that, he's told me. My understanding is you're resistant to that, you're saying for practical reasons. But keep in mind, I think the motivation Senator Leahy had, I'll speak for my conversation with him, and I've heard Senator Lee express it, the interest of maintaining Fourth Amendment protections for citizens is constitutional and inviolate. So I would expect to advocate for that again. You've answered the question, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention. You know, the heart of this is this question of whether there is an exception on the warrant protection when a U.S. citizen gets swept into this. And I know Mr. Ossoff asked in my absence about the warrant protection, but I am wanting to go back on that. Why can't we have a warrant when it does involve a U.S. citizen? And can you make distinctions between a situation where there's imminent urgency, and obviously that requires a different kind of action, where versus those situations where information comes up, my telephone number is on a telephone that's been captured on the battlefield, but there's no urgent matter that has to proceed with action. What's the problem with providing a continuation of the warrant protection that is available to all U.S. citizens outside of FISA?
So maybe Mr. Fonzone might have more to add to this, but let me just say, stepping back, so it's really important for me to be clear that when it comes to the targeting decision, the initial decision to target, that is outside of the Fourth Amendment because the targeting decisions are focused on non-U.S. persons overseas. It's only when the FBI receives.
No, I
a small-
understand that.
Yeah, it's only 3% of all of the 702 collection that FBI has access to, where it's related to an open FBI investigation. So they have 3% of the lawfully collected information, and it's very common rather than rare that the need to search that data, whether it's an ongoing cyber attack, for example, or an espionage effort, that it is not a degree of urgency to quickly be able to say, at the very earliest stage of an investigation, we need to understand, is this technical identifier associated with this cyber attack? Is this hitting other, hospitals or energy companies?
My time is coming up, and we'll have to, there's real practical questions here, but I go back to this absolutely astonishing situation where folks who showed up here in Washington, it was totally domestic, or Black Lives Matter, totally domestic, were searched. And like, how in the world did that happen? Somebody just felt like doing it, or what? I know my time is up, so I'm going to have to stop, but I just want to convey my ongoing concerns, which I think many of the committee members share. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Welch. Senator Blackburn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Abadi, I want to come to you because Tennesseans are incredibly concerned about the politicization of the FBI. And they have watched the FBI target parents, people of faith, people with conservative values. And I am often asked, what group is going to be next? And how did we get to this point? Because they have watched the FBI, under your leadership, draw their guns on a pro-life advocate. That was stunning to them. That was done in front of his wife and children. They have labeled parents interested in education as domestic terrorists. And all parents should be interested and are interested in their children's education. They watched the raid on a former president and a political opponent on his home. And these have confirmed their worst fears, that there are indeed two tiers of justice, and that there is a political cabal within the FBI that sees it that way. Because when Hillary Clinton mishandled information and she wiped her email server with a tool called BleachBit and then beat the mobile devices with a hammer and destroyed those SIM cards, you all basically said there's nothing to see here. There is nothing to question. And when President Biden mishandled classified documents, there was no raid on his home or on his offices. But you see how President Trump has been handled with this. So it looks like the old playbook of distract and deflect. And the American people have a right to be concerned about this. Now, I want to talk about Senator Grassley's information from yesterday, because when the FBI produced the document that you referred to earlier relating to the Biden bribery allegations, and you gave that to House Oversight, you all redacted any reference to the fact that the foreign national who allegedly bribed Joe and Hunter Biden had those 17 audio voice recordings. So first of all, why did you redact that part of the information?
Senator, first, as I said before, your assertion, or anyone who makes the assertion that the FBI is politicized, I reject it wholeheartedly. It's wrong. And it is not true. The work we do,
okay,
and the
Mr.
people I see
Abadi,
in
then
the
let me
FBI.
ask you this. You said in your response to Senator Cruz that you and the FBI do your job to the best of your ability. So why don't you tell me what your job is? Is it to defend and shield Joe Biden, or is your job to protect this country and the Constitution of the United States? Which is it?
The job of the FBI is to protect the country, keep people safe, and uphold the Constitution of our great country.
So why
Period.
are
That's
you
what we work to
using-
do every day. Objectively, there are not two standards of justice. There is only one. It's applied equally to
Practically
each and every
by
person.
perception, there are two standards, very clear standards of justice in this country. We see it every single day. The American people see this every single day. They look at you and they see a politicized entity that is weaponizing an agency of the federal government against the American people.
That is
They
not the FBI that I
out.
see, Senator.
That is not the FBI. You see, there are a lot of good people that work for the FBI, but you have a political cabal there. So why did you decide to conceal the information in that revelation to the House Oversight Committee? Why did you redact all of that pertaining to the phone calls?
We have exceptional people within the in
You're
the
not
FBI,
answering the
very
question.
best.
Why did you redact that
And they
information?
work relentlessly every day to keep this
You
country
chose
safe
not
and
to
to protect
reveal
people.
that the
Period.
calls were there, and Senator Grassley found it out anyway. Is that accurate?
With regard to the
You chose to
document,
you chose to redact it, yes or no?
we often redact documents to protect
So you
sources
chose
and
to
methods.
redact the fact that there are 17 voice recordings, 2 of those with the now president. You chose to redact that and not to give that to House Oversight.
I have
Is
no
that
idea
accurate?
if there are voice recordings or not. What I will tell you with respect to the
You have
document,
no-
the document was redacted to protect the source, as everyone knows.
Well, then
and this is
let-
a question of life
My
and death,
time has
potentially.
expired, but I think it would be helpful if when you came before us, if you were willing to answer the questions, it would help to remove the perception that the American people have, because this is what they see. They see you do it every day, and that is politicizing the FBI and using it against the American people who don't happen to be named Biden, Clinton, or one of the elites. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Abadi, let me just stay with you. You just started to answer Senator Blackburn's question that not releasing the 1023 or talking about it as a matter of life and death, question of life and death, you said. Explain.
It is potentially a question of life and death
For whom?
with regard to the source of the information.
So, okay, so now we've confirmed that the document exists. That's progress because the FBI director initially denied that it exists. Why did he do that?
We have already and previously acknowledged the existence of the documents.
Yeah, after you first denied it. Now, when a member of this committee read it, right, the FBI director, let's just get the record straight. The FBI director initially said it doesn't exist. Then Senator Grassley said, I've read it. Then he said, oh, okay, well, gotcha. I guess it does exist. Now you're going back and forth with members of this committee, what's in it. Why don't you just release it? Is it classified?
The document is not classified.
Okay. Will you commit to releasing it?
Senator, we'll take that back and we will work with you in this committee.
How about just a yes or no? Will you commit to releasing this unclassified document that alleges that the President of the United States, has taken $5 million or more in bribes from a foreign nation?
The document has already been released pursuant to a subpoena to the House Oversight Committee.
Has it been released to this committee?
We will work with this committee within the parameters that are established to meet
Will
the
you release the
request.
document to the public? It's unclassified. Don't you think the American people have a right to see it?
Senator, the document, as you know, contains sensitive information that has bearing on the life of the source of the information, potentially.
You can redact the source's name. We do this all the time.
In some instances, Senator, and I know you know this, that is not sufficient to protect people. And that's what we strive and work to do each and every day. And I hope you would take that seriously, too.
Oh, I take it very seriously. But I also take seriously the fact that your institution has repeatedly abused its authority, has repeatedly targeted political opponents. Your institution is the one that went to the door of pro-life protesters with SWAT teams to try and intimidate people because of their speech. Your institution is the one that treated parents as domestic terrorists because of their speech. Your institution is the one that, according to the court, the FISA court, ran 278,000 unwarranted, probably illegal queries on Americans, right? That was your institution, correct?
With respect to the compliance incidents, yes, some of the other things you cited, we can take them one by one. They are not.
Compliance, you would characterize the unlawful querying 278,000 times of American citizens as compliance issues?
We've said before, I've said that it's totally unacceptable.
Who's been fired for it?
Individuals involved are handled through the disciplinary process.
Who's been fired for it?
We have, in the case of the unintentional instance where something similar happened, we have fired people in the past.
Wait, I'm sorry. What does that word salad mean? The unintentional instance where what does that mean? Who's been fired for the 278,000 times that you improperly or illegally queried the database for American citizens? Anybody?
When we find intentional incidents.
Well, you're saying that the 278,000 queries were unintentional?
I believe that's correct.
Wow, 278,000 times American citizens' information was queried by your agency unintentionally? That's your testimony?
I would want to go back and check that, Senator. But
well, that's what you just told me.
My understanding is that the vast majority of
well, wait, that's different. You just said it was. You just said it was unintentional. Now it's the vast majority. Which is it? Do you know?
I would want to go back and check it.
So you don't know?
My understanding is that likely all were unintentional.
Likely all. So first it was all of them, then it was vast majority. Now it's likely all. So you don't know is the answer to the question.
I don't know the answer as we sit here today, but I will find out. Could have started with that probably.
Who was fired for the lies to the FISA court for the Carter Page warrant? Who was fired for that? Anybody? Has anybody been held accountable for your institution deliberately lying to a FISA court to get a wiretap on an ongoing presidential campaign?
There is an ongoing disciplinary process with respect to individuals involved in that.
Here's the deal. You're back in front of us asking for the reauthorization of extraordinary authorities. Multiple courts have uncovered extraordinary abuses perpetrated by your agency. You are at the same time concealing information about serious allegations made against the President of the United States, even as your institution also targets his chief political opponent in an unprecedented way. Why would we ever give you the blank check that you want to continue surveilling American citizens in an improper manner? Why would we ever do that?
Senator, we're here to talk about reforms today. I did get confirmation that the query...
No, we're not. We're here to talk about the reauthorization of Section 702. Why would we reauthorize it, given your track record of abuse and illegal improper surveillance and political targeting? Why would we do that? Why would it be appropriate for this body to do that?
We've made significant reforms and implemented corrective measures. We've seen significant progress as a result of that, Senator. The queries that you mentioned early were, in fact, unintentional. That's what I was just told by my counterpart.
That is an amazing...
the earlier question.
So your testimony is the 280,000 queries of American citizens was unintentional. That's your final answer?
That's how they were assessed by that team that did the review. I'm not satisfied with that. That's why we've implemented further measures, as I announced earlier today.
Yeah, I don't believe that at all. And frankly, we've heard from your agency 1,000 times that you're going to do better, will do better. You promised after the abuses of Title I you'd do better, and then we find out that in the meantime you're illegally querying 280,000 American citizens' data. It's unbelievable, frankly. Everything you say is unbelievable.
Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here, and thanks to all of the hardworking federal law enforcement officers that I believe are overwhelmingly majority good patriots doing a great service and keeping our country safer. I appreciate the documents that y'all sent over, particularly we can talk about what it's doing. A couple of months ago, I went over to the FBI, saw a demonstration of many of the changes that you've implemented on the online query system. I think they're very promising. It also begs the question, why did we have it before? But we've corrected that mistake. Senator Cornyn mentioned codification. I had that discussion with the department of the changes, Mr. Abate, that you all have made. I also would encourage every member to see this in action and go through the demonstration that I did. I think it's positive progress. But I had a question for you, Mr. Abate, on the three strikes. I'm trying to figure out how we get to reauthorizing Section 702. It would be irresponsible of us to not figure out a way to do it. It's critically important, very important tool. The three strikes thing, though, kind of struck me as why should anybody get past one strike? I mean, and to me, There are, whoops, I just didn't know, just finished training. Maybe that's a legitimate reason, but 3 strikes against the controls that you're putting in place before what action occurs? What happens with strike 3? I'm assuming they're out, but what are they out of?
It could include everything up to dismissal, Senator. And I think it's important to clarify here, the 3 strikes applicability refers to those that are deemed to be, those compliance errors that are, or incidents that are deemed to be unintentional. And it's an escalating approach with respect to the 3 strikes. If someone was to unintentionally commit an error like this 3 times, then they would be referred for greater discipline. In addition to the things that come into play, their FISA access would be removed upon the occurrence of the first incident. They would undergo full mandatory retraining. They would have to sit down and be counseled by one of the attorneys from our Office of General Counsel. And it gives us the ability to, evaluate the conduct and determine whether it is truly unintentional or whether it should be elevated to the category of reckless or even intentional, which would warrant more severe disciplinary action. One of the things I've struggled with as I've looked at the compliance incidents, and this gets back to the other senator's earlier question, those that are unintentional. Given the measures we've put in place now with the system adaptations, the prompts with regard to sensitive queries, the written justification, the parameters around batch queries and sensitive queries, and the opt-in, it's hard to imagine that it would be unintentional if someone pushes through all of those measures in order to run a query that is found to be non-compliant. And that's part of the strength of the sort of regime of reforms that we've put in place now, because prior, and this was not satisfactory to any of us, many of them were categorized as unintentional when they may not have otherwise been, and they may have risen to the level of recklessness or even intentionality.
Could you talk a little bit about, I think that with Crossfire, people have raised some concerns, and I think rightfully so, about Crossfire Hurricane. We all know it. That was mostly Title I as opposed to Section 702. Do you agree with that? And can you explain the differences?
I do agree with that, Senator. That was Title I FISA. That's the traditional FISA. Where we go to the FISA court, it involves a U.S. person, and I'll defer to my colleague here to get into the legalities. But we are, in those instances, we go to the FISA court. We have to establish probable cause in order to get authorization to implement surveillance on the individual targeted.
Mr. Olson, in response to, I think, one of Senator Ossoff's questions about this information being used in an investigation, I think you stated a relatively small number of people who are actually swept into that category. Can you elaborate a little bit more? And over time, are we seeing fewer of those? Is that because we're getting trained better, or it's just because we're honing our investigations?
Sure. When we were talking about is the FBI's authority to conduct a query of the data it has access to for simply evidence of a crime that is not national security related, it's exceedingly rare, and it's rare because there has to be we're talking about a database that is a foreign intelligence database. So the odds of finding simply evidence of a non-national security crime, bank robbery, public corruption in a foreign intelligence database is just so unlikely. That in the last recording period, there were 16 instances, but actually 14 of those 16 instances was where the FBI had an affirmative obligation to search for evidence of a crime because of discovery or Brady obligations in an ongoing case. So it is not obviously the main purpose. It is, I would consider it sort of a backstop or fail-safe if there is evidence of a non-national security crime that the FBI would want to see or follow up on. But it's just so exceedingly rare. It's not the focus, certainly, of our efforts.
Well, my time's expired, but I would encourage, as I said after that demonstration of the changes that you've made, that we need to see a meaningful legislative proposal on the codification of all the measures that you put into place. And I think probably based on the comments you have here, This is not an ideological dispute for the most part. You've got different people supportive, other people that want to go dark. We need the department to fairly quickly get us some baseline text that those of us who want to get it reauthorized can begin to explain how we're addressing the problems that are legit problems, and every member here who's frustrated has a reason to be. Thank you all.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, Senator Tillis. Pursuant to the procedures and traditions of the committee when it comes to the debate of 702, we have a session reserved